Afternoon, everybody. Okay, so this is trying something brand new. So first of all, I would like to check that it's working. So it should be streaming live now. I think most of you will be joining me on YouTube. And if you could just type something into the chat for me, that would be much appreciated. Just letting me know that you can see me, that you can hear me. And you should be seeing a shared screen, which at the moment probably just looks like an absolute tunnel. But you'll see me flicking back and forth between some maps and some Word documents and some aerial shots. So if you can type into the chat for me that you can see and you can hear, that would be much appreciated. So I'll just give you a moment to do that because I can't see any comments at the moment, and I want to make sure that you are in fact seeing what I'm putting there. So actually, I'm going to type a comment in there myself. Can you hear and see me, everyone? If you can reply to that, that would be much appreciated. So this is a good reason why you do these things. Actually, I can see, yes, I can see some eyeballs on me on YouTube. Fantastic. Can't see your comments though. So if you are on there, if you could, I can see and hear. This is my son's profile. Got it. Yeah, I was wondering about the profile picture. Love it. Excellent. So just so I know, undercover, I'm not going to say knob, but I just did. So who are you if this is your son's profile? That'd be helpful. All right, we kick into things. So guys, what we're going through today is we're going through a 10-lot subdivision. So this is actually one of your, Leandri, hey, very good. So this is actually Leandri's subdivision that she has at the moment. It is potentially a 10-lot subdivision, which she is looking at staging over multiple stages, which we will go through why she's doing that. Is it a good reason? Should she not do that? Why do you stage projects as they get larger? There's a number of reasons why it can be a good idea, but we'll go through that as we go through the project. So in short, it is a 10-lot subdivision. And so this is a property that she has, you can see the map there, we'll come back to that. This is a property that she purchased in 2023. So she has owned this one for a little while, and they've been looking at multiple possible, strategies with this in terms of time frame. There's question marks of do they want to eventually live in the existing house or potentially build a house on one of the new blocks of land. And so this is up in Townsville. So you can see there Mount Louisa, which is up in the Townsville area. So it is a regional area, which does play into some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But before we continue on, I should do a disclaimer that this is not financial advice. It is not taking into consideration anyone's personal circumstances. So this is purely for educational purposes. So do not use what we go through today to make financial decisions without consulting professionals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 10-lot subdivision, question is this a good project? Is it not a good project? What is it going to cost to develop? What is the potential profit? And ultimately, where do the biggest risks and the biggest opportunities lie in this deal? So that's what we're going to uncover today. Now, Leandri and I have been working through this deal together over the last couple of days, and we've together probably spent about 2 hours going through this blow by blow, and that's on top of my pulling the deal apart before actually meeting with her. So we're going to try and condense a lot into the next 35 to 45 minutes. So forgive me if it seems like I'm punching through, but there's actually a fair bit to get through with this one. So any questions you do have, pop them into the chat, and we will get to them as we can. All right, so let's start. We'll go through, this is a deal assessment template document that I asked Leandri to fill out before we had a look at the deal. Okay, so she purchased for $840,000 in 2023, and she got a standard residential investment loan on the property, looking at options of should she do a 10-lot subdivision or should she go an 8-lot subdivision to create larger lifestyle blocks. So the question there is typically, not always, but typically the more blocks you can get, i.e. the higher the yield of the development, the higher your profit is going to be. But there are certainly times where on paper it looks better, but based on market circumstances, it might not be the right decision. I'll give you an example of one of my previous projects in the past. I forget the exact size of the block. I think it was 2,000 odd square meters. We could do small lot subdivision there. So we could go down as far as, even smaller than 200 square meter lots. So probably could have turned it into a 7 to 10 lot subdivision. However, I ended up deciding to do a 5 lot subdivision. Why? Number one, the feasibility at 5 lots was already fantastic. It was over 30% return on cost. Number two, there was a very large development with a very large developer around the corner releasing a large stage with lots of small blocks, but no bigger blocks than about 300 square meters. Now, this was one of my earliest projects. I certainly had no appetite to go into battle with a large developer around the corner. And so my decision was feasibility is great at 400 square meter blocks. And in that way, in no way am I competing with that larger developer. So in that case, I decided to go with 400 square meter blocks and do 5 of them rather than doing 7 to 10 smaller blocks and competing with that other developer. So that's an example as to why you may not decide to do as many blocks as is technically possible. Okay, so it is a sloping site. It's up in Townsville. That is a slower market, and especially based on flooding and all those sorts of things, it can go hot and cold. So that's definitely a consideration when we're looking at the sales risk side of the project. Existing house is on septic and grey water. For those that don't know, that means it's not connected into the town sewer system. It has its own local system to deal with the wastewater of the property. House is livable. Some sheds need demolishing. Okay, we don't really need to go into that stuff there too much. Okay, so they've done a pre-lodgement meeting with council, which is great. Initial response from council is positive. So they know they're going in line with what the council is wanting. In fact, in this council area at the moment, they're even offering subsidies, if you will, or grants to encourage infill development. So this is clearly a council very motivated to do development. So we've got another aerial there, survey plan. We don't need to go through this stuff at the moment. Okay, so this is a potential design, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see she's marked here, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. There's also another potential stage up here. Now, when you look at larger development sites, and I'm talking sites that are 50, 100 lots or more, often you'll see them broken into stages of potentially 25 lots or more, because when you're getting at that scale, then that's sort of what makes sense. In this case here, the reason that you would look at staging this is, number one, it's her first development. This is a big development for someone's first development. So there's a lot of things that she has yet to experience, given that it is her first development. So there's that don't know what you don't know sort of situation. Also, given the local market there is the consideration that what if the market slows down? What if there's a flood? What if the market cools significantly there? When those regional markets do that, you can be sitting there holding stock for a year, 2 years or more. So if you go and develop the whole thing, you're now in. You've spent all that money. You can't get that money back out without selling. Now, even if you've done that with cash, that's a lot of cash that is tied up. It's a lot of sleepless nights, and there's a lot of opportunity cost for what other things you could be doing with that cash. Now, if you've financed it with construction finance, you now have that interest eating out your profits while you wait to be able to sell it. So that's not something you want to risk. You don't want to be risking being left with stock. So what she's looking at here is potentially releasing 3 to 4 lots at a time, which limits the amount of capital and money she needs to put into the development, sell off a few blocks, take some profit, get the coffers full again, go to another few lots. And given her long-term personal possibilities with this block, she might do that over 10 years. That's decisions for her to make. But if you were looking at this just to do it now, bang, not a bad strategy splitting them up this way, given the regional nature of it and the fact that this is her first subdivision. Most of you that know me, I suggest staying below 5 lots for your first subdivision. So this is quite an undertaking. But on the positive side, there's no new road construction, which is definitely not something I would encourage you to take on your first development. So there's our additional possible 4th stage with a couple of rear lots. This is the consideration for doing some larger lots. Now, just give you my answer on that straight away. In this situation here, I don't believe going the larger lots is the way to go. If you look at the market norm, across the road here, these are all roughly 600 square meter blocks. So in this market, in this area, that 600 square meter block size is well tested and well established and well accepted. So without any other information, I don't see a solid reason as to why you would increase the size of the blocks, unless for whatever reason in that market, people were paying a significant premium for that sort of a lifestyle block. I don't, at least at this point with the information I've been given, I don't see a reason to do that. Okay, floor plan of the existing house. We're not going to get into that today because they are looking at keeping that existing house. No asbestos that they are aware of. Zoning is quite clear. It's quite an elevated site and a slope site, so flooding is not really an issue. And we've got some comparable sales, which we'll go through as we go through the project. Okay, let's look at services, because as we know, and as we've gone through in other projects, we know that the services can often be, I was just saying, Evelyn, how do we see what you are talking about? Not screen sharing. Thank you for that. All right, that's interesting. It was screen sharing, now it's not. Okay, get that in the comments. Can you see the screen share now? Just get that in the comments, guys. Can you see the screen now? So you should be able to see, for example, right now, the services map for water, sewer, and stormwater. At the top right-hand corner, it will say City of Townsville. Can you see that? Yep, excellent, good. And yes, when I flip back to the screen, which is where I see your comments, then yes, you'll get that tunnel vision. Okay, just to answer your question there, Rachel, would you ever create lots of different sizes to cover a few price points? So look, the bigger the development, you'll find that the council will actually dictate that you must. So often these days, they require you to provide a mix of block sizes and shapes. It's different in different councils. Some focus more on just what your average size is and your average frontage is. Others actually have specific percentages. They will say, here are our different block types, block type A, B, C, D, E. And if you are doing X amount of blocks, then you need to provide at least 10% of block A type, at least 20% of block B type, et cetera, et cetera. So it is governed by the council in those situations. When you're talking smaller projects like this, I'll still count 10 lots as a smaller project. You tend to not get as much interference from council in terms of what block size or arrangement you need to do. I wouldn't say in this side here, this sort of project here, that there is really an incentive to do varying block sizes. No, just because if you look at the footprint of the area, it's a very well established size type, which means the builders are used to building on that size of block, which means the market is kind of expecting that block. So in this case, I don't see the benefit. Okay, so let's start on services. We will come back to this one. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so this is the property here in the middle of the crosshairs. What we're looking at is electricity. So if you look over here at the key, you can see substation, you can see pit, pole, pillar. For us, what we want to look at here is the high voltage cable. So we can see in the footpath directly in front of this property is a high voltage cable underground. And we can't see any pillars, but we can see that the power is there. Okay, so that is a big win, and you can see that it's connected over the road here, and that's clearly how these blocks are connected as well. So that's a big plus, because we're looking at basically putting our blocks bang, bang, bang across the front, which means for electricity, it's just plug and play. It's just creating a bollard, which normally there's one bollard sitting between two properties. Actually, I feel like they did show it. Yes, here it is. Okay, so here you can see these bollards sit over the boundary, and that one bollard will service these two properties. That bollard here will service these two properties. And you can see here with the key, the pole, so there's a mixture in this street. It appears there's also an overhead pole here, an overhead pole here. But given that there is electricity in the footpath there, my guess is that we will be required to do, or Leandria will be required to do a new bollard per two blocks. Either way, this is a good outcome. You've got electricity in the footpath, which means you don't need to bring it under the road or across the road in any way, which can be very expensive. So that is about as good as it gets when it comes to electricity, having it running straight in front of your block frontages. So it is just plug and play. That's the dream. That's great. So I'm just going to flick back and forth so that I can see your questions. This is part of my learning. I'm sure there's a way that I'll be able to see the comments on the other page, but we won't worry about that today. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. That's all still electricity. NBN. Okay, a little bit interesting. So what we're looking at here is your dark, actually, I think I've still left the key in there. Yeah, so if you have a look here, the dark blue is trench containing and it's designed and planned, whereas the green is in service and actually constructed. So this blue line here, according to the map, is not actually what's been constructed. That was what was planned. The green line is what was actually constructed. So NBN does exist. The property is serviced by it. It comes from a connection here. Now, on the frontages here where we're planning the new blocks, there is no NBN. It is across the street and there's a connection here. So what that tells me is we have the ability to connect to NBN. Great. So we're going to have to connect to NBN, but we are going to have to run new cabling across the frontage of these properties. So that immediately means that design is required. So if it was in the footpath directly in front, then no design would be required, and we just get a certificate of supply from NBN. From memory, it's about $600 per new block. No construction required, no design required, very cost effective, very relatively cheap. Because it's not in front of the property, we've got to bring it there. That now means we need an electrical engineer to do a design for us, and then we're going to have to construct it. So our costs have just jumped significantly compared to if it was existing in the footpath in front of us. Now, normally we do an allowance on the larger projects for about, pardon me, for about $7,000 per lot for electricity and communication. Now, in this case here, the electricity we saw is perfect. It's fantastic. At least according to the map. Always keep in mind that these maps don't show you everything. The NBN is going to require construction and design. So we'll come to that in the feasibility. Okay. Telstra is now irrelevant because NBN does exist. When NBN is in place, there's no requirement for you to do anything with Telstra typically. I don't know why you would, but if anyone's wondering, can you choose to connect to Telstra? No. So Telstra is the old outdated network, NBN is the future. So if NBN exists there, you'll always be required to connect to NBN. Okay. Now, you've heard me say before that often services of sewer, water, and stormwater, most specifically stormwater and sewer, are often the first thing to check because they are often the things that are most likely to kill the deal. Why? Okay, sewer, poo doesn't run uphill. So you need to have sewer flowing downhill to a sewer outlet. Stormwater doesn't run uphill. So again, you need a legal point of discharge where you can get the stormwater off your site. So those two are often the ones that are the biggest problem because the others, they can run uphill, they can run downhill, they can run around corners. Water, it's pressurized, it can run uphill. That's why there's that difference. Now, this site here looks like Leandri, in regards to these services, looks like Leandri did something really good in a previous life, and this is her payback because this is as good as it gets in terms of services for infill development and plug and play. Why do I say that? Because we've got a trifecta. We've got the light blue, which I think we left the key there just for you guys to see it. Yep. So light blue is your water, dark blue is your stormwater, and brown is your wastewater. And it appears, according to this map, that all three exist in the footpath straight in front of her new frontages, which is literally as good as it gets. That is amazing and absolute win. Fantastic. Dream situation. What I will point out, the sites that you are most likely to get that on are corner sites. Now, while this is kind of corner, kind of not corner, that's why you're seeing that situation there. So corner sites are often very efficient to develop. So we've got water here, we've got sewer here. You can see that's the existing sewer connection here. And there's also this sewer line running up the side of the property. So we've actually got two potential connection points for the sewer. So depending on the slope of the land, the engineers will determine what is going to be the most appropriate place to connect. But either way, you've got multiple options for sewer. So just so you know, the slope is from the back towards the front and probably a bit down to this corner here, I think, from memory. But either way, you've got multiple options for the sewer, and you've got stormwater going all the way down the frontage and even around the corner here. So just like, it doesn't get any better than that. That's amazing. It's fantastic. So no issues with those services, at least based on the information we have here. Okay, so that's all the services we need to look at for the moment. So just before I go on, any questions on that? See one here. Hi, Beat, if you could show the slide with proposed lots for others to understand how the 10 lots fits. Screen was not sharing when you were on that slide. Good point. So yes, thank you, Leandri. I'll actually, yep, so we'll go back. So this is the deal assessment template that Leandri filled in for me. We'll go to the next one. Okay, so this is what we're looking at here, guys. Now, just to double check, put in the comments for me that you can see that, please, guys. So I've gone back to the tunnel screen at the moment, but can you see this here when I'm showing you the intended lot layout? So we've got stage 1, lots 1, 2, 3, stage 2, 5, 6, 7, stage 3, 6, stage 4, 9, and 10. Can you see that? Yep, excellent, fantastic. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. So what Leandri is looking at, we've done the feasibility on doing everything at once, but that's not actually her plan. But she wants to look at what the site looks like as a whole in terms of its feasibility. And then really breaking it down into stages just limits her sales risk and her financial risk. So what she's looking at the moment is cutting off these first 3 here. And then, so we'd have a driveway up here to the existing house, and potentially then do 5, 6, 7. Personally, if stage 1 goes well, Leandri, I don't really see any reason why you would split that to a 3rd stage. You'd probably just do those in one line, unless, of course, there's a specific requirement or the engineers or town planners point out something. But one of the key things with this, guys, is one of the reasons I strongly suggest you stay below 5 lots for your first project is, in many ways, as soon as you cross that threshold and you go to 5 or more lots, you are viewed no longer as a novice developer is probably the best way to put it. So then there are higher expectations of you and there are higher requirements of you. One thing being that the Queensland Land Sales Act comes into play. So that's if you're in Queensland, and it will be, your own. If you're in other states, they will have their own situation to deal with there. But basically, once you cross that threshold, you then need to provide what's called disclosure plans. Now, disclosure plan means you need to provide plans that are accurate enough that they can do their designs to build on. So exact retaining wall heights, exact ground finishing heights, exact contours, everything needs to be exact. Now, you can't do that super early on in the project. You can't do that pre-town planning, pre-DA approval. Typically, you've got to wait till around operational works approval when you've got that level of certainty, which means you can't start selling before that. Whereas if you're doing a 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, and the Land Sales Act doesn't apply, you can literally start selling off the plan with a mud map sketched on the back of a napkin. Now, obviously, you need the appropriate contract clauses to go with that, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that. So in terms of de-risking projects, start selling as soon as you can. So staying under 5 lots allows you to do that. The other thing too is when you go over 5 lots, you start opening up the question or the possibility of needing to do bio-retention or water treatment, which what that can look like is when you drive around and you look at these newer developments, they have these big, what look like a pond. It's full of reedy grass and plants, and they tend to look very ugly, but that's a retention, storm retention situation or a water treatment plant. And the idea there is when you develop this site here, they don't want you placing any additional strain on their stormwater infrastructure. As it is now, it's grass, it's trees, it's dirt. When it rains, it absorbs. when you go develop this and you fill it with houses, you fill it with tin roofs, and you fill it with concrete, they don't absorb. The water runs straight off. So that water flying off the site when it rains becomes much faster and much more acute. Whereas if you have a stormwater retention system, the water flows into there first, it fills up, and then it slowly seeps out over the days following. But if you're under 5 lots, typically 99% of the time, you will not be required to do that. So not only do you avoid the cost, because they cost 30 to 50,000 to build, and you don't lose the land to it, because they can be pretty big. They can be the size of a lot. So it can mean not only costing you 30 to 50,000, it can mean also that you lose the revenue from a potential block. So staging it this way keeps her under that 5 lots, even though the end intention is to do 10. If each stage is under 5 lots, you don't trigger that. So that's a really powerful thing. So I'll just wait for a second if there's any questions on that, because that is a really important point. And again, I hope none of you have to deal with that in your first ones, because I strongly suggest staying under 5 lots. But if you've got any questions on that, just throw them in at the moment. Well, no, good to go. Excellent. Okay, so service is looking solid. You've now seen the outlines of the intended design. So that's, what is it, Strathburn Street there. We've got Thorn Street here. Now, something else which is a consideration in this one is the existing house has issues with its septic system. So its sewer and grey water system. Now, often when you do these kinds of developments, they will require, regardless, if it's available, that you connect the existing house up to the water and the sewer, the town sewer. So even if you didn't want to, we didn't actually go through that today, Leandri. So it may be different in Townsville, being a more regional council, but I know here in Brisbane and Moreton Bay Council, and I have that in an existing development where there's a house that hasn't been lived in 15 years, and they want me to upgrade the septic system or connect it to our new infrastructure, even though no one is living there and even though no one will ever live there again. But so typically you will be required to provide a up-to-date system, compliance system, or a new connection for the existing dwelling if it's on septic and sewer is actually available. So in this case here, it might be a case of bringing the water and sewer up here through an easement on this block to the house up here somewhere, or potentially up this way here. Now, just for those that are not familiar with easements, different councils will have different requirements on how big that easement is. For water, it might be, say, 1 metre. For sewer, it might be 3 metres over that pipe, and that's so they can access it to do maintenance or repairs if need be. Now, physically, it's nothing. You can't see it when you're on the block. It's a legal agreement, but it's registered on the title. So it can have an impact on the saleability of the land, typically more so on smaller lots than bigger, because bigger, it's unlikely to make much of a difference. But the new owner is not allowed to build anything over that. They're not even meant to have any sort of permanent structures on it, even like gardens. Yeah, you can have gardens, but you just got to understand that at any point they are within their rights to come in, tear it up, and do what they need to do to repair or do maintenance on those utilities. So that's probably going to come up this side here. And so these 2 blocks here in the future, which aren't part of stage 1, will likely have an easement on them to allow for those services if it comes up there. Or in a perfect world, it would be up the driveway and this way, so it's not impacting any of those blocks, and then it's much easier to access those services in the future for maintenance. Okay, any questions before we jump into the feasibility? Oh, great. I'm either absolutely overloading you and you're stunned in silence, or I'm doing a good job in covering all bases. Okay, so now you've heard me say that I have a different feasibility template that I use for larger developments, and often a 10-lot subdivision, I would use that one. However, given that this one here is not requiring the construction of roads, this is probably still the most appropriate feasibility template, so we've stuck with this one. So it's 10 lots. We've allowed for a 6-month lead-in period prior to construction. Now, look, that might be on the shorter side. In this one, it's a little bit less consequential because she already owns the property. She's rented the property. They've owned it for a couple of years. So, she's in. This isn't something she's deciding to get into or not to get into. She's in. So construction period, I've allowed for 6 months. Remember, we're just talking, well, if it was all 10 lots, it's still probably not even 6 months. That's a very generous time frame because there's actually not a lot to do in this. You're connecting water, you're connecting sewer. There is actually, that's one thing I didn't cover in the future there, which will probably get done in the first one, is there'll be probably a drain that will go across here and down here to capture the water from above so that it doesn't flow down onto these blocks because the slope flows this way. So that is a cost for the stormwater side of things, in that we've got to put a drain in here. Now, what that's going to cost, we're going to cover that in the feasibility, but at the moment, it's a big question mark. We've made an estimate, but it's a question mark because it depends on how the engineer wants to design it. If that's literally just a gravel drain with an Aggie pipe at the bottom of it, pretty inexpensive. If it's a concrete swale drain, very different story. We're yet to find out that information, but that is a consideration that we need to think about. And in the future, highly likely something similar might be required on these ones here as well. Okay. So the property was bought for $840,000 in 2023. Now, we've allowed, and most of these numbers are actually what Leandri has put in. I've only adjusted a few of them. So she's actually done, for her first feasibility, she's done a cracking job. So well done. So she's worked as much as she could with the guides that I provide on the side here. And she's put some notes in here for me as to why and when she's adjusted different numbers, which was very helpful. And then where need be, I've made some adjustments. But so she's worked on the guide of $5,000 per additional lot for water and sewer. Now, in this case here, for the new lots, I highly doubt it's going to even be that much because it is right there in the footpath. It is just literally stub connections, at least from the information we have here. The civil engineer can confirm those things. There sometimes are extenuating circumstances which change it, but based on what we're seeing, it seems like plug and play. So 45,000 for sewer, 45,000 for water is probably ample, but we do need to acknowledge that we are going to have to do new connections for the existing house. So that's why I'm not suggesting we reduce it, because it seems like a reasonable amount. Might be a bit over, but it's not that much over that I feel the need that we want to reduce it. And in your feasibilities, you are better off leaving them with a bit of fat in there. You don't want to try and cut everything out wherever, because I promise you, there'll always be things you didn't think of that will come up. So you're better off having that buffer in there. Now, stormwater, we've left the 25,000 in there. Now, that was just something Leandri put in, and she's gone off that guide of 1K per lot and some other notes there. Now, I don't think it's going to cost that much, but if the engineer was deciding to do some sort of a concrete drain all the way across the back there, just due to the price of concrete these days, yeah, it could get up to that. So I don't think that's what she's going to incur, but we're going to leave that in there just in case. Power and telecoms. So this is one I think from memory we adjusted. She allowed 2,000 per additional lot, but because design is required, immediately you've got the engineer and you also got construction for NBN. Now, like I was saying, the normal provisional amount we use for communication and electricity is 7,000 per lot in the larger developments. So what we've gone with here, super conservative, is we've gone the 7,000 per lot, even though the power is plug and play. And we've just split it up across two areas. We've put 50,000 there, and we've put the 13,000 down lower for the electrical engineer. So totaling 63,000. I believe that's probably going to be more than enough. But for the moment, as an initial run on the numbers, that's a good place to start. House demo. So we've got no demolition of house, but there is an old Bessebrick shed that needs to go. FYI, if it wasn't Bessebrick, you'd sell it. You'd be amazed at what you can sell things for, anything that isn't movable. So if it's a shed, if it's a carport, any of those things, stick them on Marketplace. And yeah, it's a great way to build up a Christmas fund. I've had sites where, actually I won't say that out loud, but let's just say you can make some good money from the things you sell off your sites sometimes. Erosion and sediment control, we've just put an allocation in there. What's that? So that's silt fences, basically. to make sure when there is rainfall that the loose silt is not flowing from your site out onto the road and into the stormwater systems and causing blockages. Rear access driveway. So this is actually an estimate given to her by the civil engineer. So they've said 75,000 for the first part of it, 75,000 for the second part of it. Look, that's a very sizable allocation. Is it going to cost that much? Maybe not. With concrete these days, though, it wouldn't shock me. And it may not actually be needed yet, because that driveway up the middle, which is what they're talking about there, is private property and going to service the existing dwelling. It's unlikely the council can dictate or will dictate that that needs to be sealed straight away. So that may be just a choice that she gets to make. Earthworks. So Leandri had 90,000 in there for that. Now, currently the civil engineer's plan is not to bench and retain, so not to flatten and retain the blocks. So if that's the case, you're probably not going to have to need to use that allocation. But Leandri has decided to leave it in there as a provisional sum for potentially the back blocks later on. Now, we did have some pretty lengthy talks about, is it worth flattening the blocks or not? Now, why would we have that conversation? What's the difference? Well, most builders are experts in building on flat blocks. So if you think of the way it typically works, typically people will find a builder that they like first, and then they'll go and try and find the land to build on. So if that builder then says, oh no, we don't build on slope blocks, it's got to be flat, your block no longer qualifies if it's not flat. So you reduce your market that is going to be buying or looking to buy your site. So flat blocks sell much easier. Now, in this one here, I guess the bigger the block, the less important that becomes. And also it's not as easy to do it on the bigger the blocks as well, because where is the building footprint going to be? You know, when it's a 400 square meter block, you know pretty much exactly where the house is going to be built. It can only be built in a certain spot. Whereas if it's a 1,000 square meter block, there's actually a bit of flexibility there typically as to where they build the house. So it's not so easy to go, oh, we'll just create a building platform for them or a building pad. So in this situation here, these blocks are, I think we had that on the town plan assessment, didn't we, Leandri? Let me just pull that up for you guys. So this was an initial assessment done by a town planner. Now this here shows the contours. Okay, so we can see we're at 19 meters above sea level here, and up the back of the property at 38. So it's a 20 meter rise roughly from the street to the back of the property. What we're interested in here is this section here. Now you can see the front, it does rise, but it's at about here that it gets pretty serious increase up to the back of the blocks, which is about here. So you've got, I think we figured out roughly 5 to 6 meters from the road up to the back of the block. That's pretty significant. So to bench and retain that, you're talking really substantial earthworks and really substantial retaining. And the thing you need to remember with retaining is, if you want to retain something that is a 5 meter difference, it's not just typically a straight 5 meter wall. Normally what they'll want to see is 1 meter up, 1 meter in, 1 meter up, 1 meter in. So if you're going up 5 meters, you're also coming out 5 meters as well, which has you lose a substantial amount of usable land. So in this situation here, I believe what is going to be the best approach is going to be working with some builders that specialize in homes that are built into slopes, doing house and land packages to market that solution and going about it that way. Trying to flatten these blocks doesn't really seem like a viable solution. Pardon me. But yes, where possible and where cost effective, flattening the block is typically the way to go. Just see if we've got any questions on that at the moment. A good job from Rachel. I assume that's for you, Leandri, so thumbs up. Okay, so we'll go back to the feasibility. Okay, no need for a footpath. C-pitch pits. So C-pitch pits are a legal point of discharge solution in certain councils. Not many of them allow them, but basically if you've got a block sloping away from the street and there's no other area where you can get the water off site, some councils, not many, allow you still to discharge the water into the neighboring property if it goes through a C-pitch pit, which is basically a small water retention plant. So effectively they dig a big hole, fill it with gravel, line it so it's at the lowest point of the block where the water naturally flows, water flows into it, fills up, and then over the days that come, it slowly seeps out so that it doesn't increase the water flow onto a neighbouring property. But remember, most councils do not allow those, so definitely don't count on it. Legal point of discharge can be an absolute deal killer. We've just done a bit of an arbitrary number for some turfing on the footpath, assuming a bit of damage will happen as they do earthworks. Now, retaining walls, in this current plan, we actually don't have any definite retaining walls. So there is not a detailed design done by an engineer. If they are planning on leaving the contours relatively natural, there may be no retaining needed. However, I like Leandri's approach in that she's put an allocation towards it just in case. Fire hydrant. Yes, highly likely that she is going to have to install a fire hydrant. Why? Because every property needs to be within reach of a fire hydrant. Typically, the allowance is 80 meters. And given that she is basically, if we go back to that design, now depending where the fire hydrant is, let's say it's here. Well, the way they're going to look at it is they're going to go, well, if there's a fire, we need to plug into the hydrant here, and our hoses need to go all the way up here to get to this back house. And if that's too long, the hoses don't reach. So what might be required is either a fire hydrant here at the entrance or potentially one up the back, yet to be seen. But yes, highly likely she's going to have to do a fire hydrant. As soon as you've got a rear access situation, you're probably having to do a fire hydrant. Now, I haven't done one of those in quite some time, but the last numbers I got on it was about 28,000. So fencing, 39,000. Now, what are we fencing? Okay, glad you asked. So when it goes to selling land, it's like selling houses. If you sell a house empty and not staged, it's sales suicide. Pardon me. You are definitely not getting the most for your property if you don't stage the house. With land, how do you stage it? You stage it by, number one, fencing it so the boundaries are clear and making it clear and green. Why clear and green? Because like a home, when you're selling a home, you want them to come in and get emotionally involved. You want them to get emotionally attached. And very importantly, psychologically, you want them to start envisioning their future there, seeing their future there. This is why when you see staging in homes, you never see family photographs. Because if someone else's family photographs are on the wall, it's very hard for the buyer to start seeing them and their family having a future there. That's why it's always neutral photographs. So same with land is we want the site clear. Ideally, and now for the tree lovers, you're not going to like this, ideally clear of trees. Now, obviously, if we're talking acreage blocks, not the case. But I used to try and keep as many trees as I could on my sites. And the first thing the buyers would ask when we get out there is, are you getting rid of the trees? So number one, definitely clearing trees where building pads are going to be. Potentially clearing trees across the whole site. But one of the golden rules is once you lodge that DA, you've now put the trees in front of the council. Now, if they are not protected beforehand, they might get protected once the council sees them. So if there are trees that are not protected and you are within your rights to remove them, and they are ones that need to be removed for the development, pretty damn good motivation to get rid of them before you lodge the application. Now, Leandri and I had a chat about these because they are full of shrubs, full of trees, full of weeds. So when it comes to selling, there's a decent amount of clearing that needs to happen here. That's better off happening sooner rather than later and then being maintained. And yeah, for fencing, so what we've allowed for is fencing up side boundary, the back up here, same thing over here. You don't do it on the boundaries separating the blocks, because you do that with bunting. The reason being is when you put a fence there and a fence there, it makes these look small. You don't want that. You want it to look spacious. So, it's marketing tricks, but that's what you do. So we've allowed for that amount of fencing. And the rate in Townsville at the moment is about $150 a linear meter. So we've allowed for that. So 260 meters of fencing at $150. Tree clearing, about 15 grand. Realistically, in this sort of situation here, you're talking demolition crews really just coming and bulldozing it. If you get arborists to go out or specialist tree, what do you call it? I'm blanking on the term right now, but if you go to an arborist to go get rid of those trees, it's probably 10 times that price. You're not looking for the guys that are climbing up and doing it branch by branch. In this sort of clearing, when you've got the space, you're looking at getting a excavator and going bang and just clearing the stuff off. So if you're doing demolition, you typically get it done at the same time by the same crew, which is the most cost-effective way. So we've got 15 grand and 10 grand for demolition, so that should be ample. Tree clearing, and that was just a conversation we were having. We ignore that for the moment. So that's not necessarily an item. Should have deleted that beforehand. Apologies. Now, soft costs. So as you can see here, that has added up to a decent amount of civils. $500,000 in civils. Is anyone surprised by that? Let's just see that. Is anyone surprised by there being $500,000 worth of civils in this project? No one surprised? Now, I'd actually like to know that the chat's working. So even if you're not surprised, if you could type that into the chat, that'd be much appreciated. Remember, guys, I'm staring at a screen here, talking in an empty room. It helps when I see interaction in the comments. I know I'm talking to people. Rachel, not really surprised? Yeah, good. Yeah, the development feasibilities, and this is why you'll notice when we get to the soft costs, it might seem arbitrary that I'm putting in things like, accounting 4,000, insurance 5,000, advertising. In the grand scheme of a cost of $1 million, you might think, why bother even putting that in there? Well, it's the old death by 1,000 cuts. You'd be amazed at all of these little 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, all those things add up. And pretty quickly, it can be 50,000, it can be 100,000. So if you know if you know of a cost, regardless of how small it is, unless we're talking like $50, it should be in there. Okay. So she already owns it, but we've allowed for that in the feasibility. So legals at purchasing. Council works. She has worked on 35,000 per new allotment, which is fair. Now, surveyor, she's got an allowance for nearly 10,000. Electrical engineers, the 13,000 we mentioned earlier. That's the breakdown of the 7,000 per lot. So a total of 63,000. We let 50,000 at the top and 13 down here. Town planner, council DA, application. Now, all of these now she can get quotes on. She doesn't need to estimate these anymore. These are all things she can go and get proposals from these consultants and get hard numbers. But these allowances seem fair. Now, noting with the surveyor, there's actually a couple of lines that are allocated to the surveyor. You've got here surveyor, but then also plan sealing covers a bit for the surveyor, and so does pegging and survey plan. That's also from the surveyor. So here she's actually got 14,000, 5,000, and 9,900 allocated towards the surveyor. My guess is that that number is going to come down once she gets the proposals. Now, she did have something allocated to council negotiated decision notice. I told her that's something we could comfortably remove because she's already had a pre-lodgement meeting with council and they were generally supportive of the application. She's not doing anything impact accessible. She's doing code accessible. It's a pretty cut and dry development from what we can tell. So there's really no reason to expect that we're going to have to go into battle with council in a way to negotiate a decision or an outcome at the end. So really that allowance there is for the fees associated with council and additional work from your town planner and your engineer to argue whatever you're arguing in a negotiated decision. So we've got allocation for plan sealing, which again, that's covering a little bit of your surveyor again, but it's a bit of a double up there, but also legals as well for things like if you've got to get easement documents drawn up, those legal documents. So yeah, it's not always that simple to say exactly what that's going to be ahead of time. It's more about having an appropriate allocation for it. We've talked about that. So civil consultant and geo report. Now, I believe this is probably way over the odds. We had a chat about this one. Leandri got an initial geotech report quote for 18,000, which to me seems absurd. So I've asked her to go and get multiple quotes from different geotechs and ask her engineer to recommend a few that they have dealt with in the past and also get the scope of work checked by her civil engineer and potentially the town planner. because that just doesn't sound right to me. So we want to make sure, number one, that he's actually quoting on the appropriate thing and that it's not more than what is needed. And we want to make sure we're comparing apples and apples. And so we've allowed for 35,000 for, actually where she's pulled that from is 30,000 is the guide over here for 6 to 10 lots, and then allowing some more for the geotech report. Now, I don't believe she's actually going to have that level of cost with this, because normally, often when you have a 6 to 10, you notice the big jump here, 2 to 5 lots is 10,000, and then jumps to 30,000 for 6 to 10 lots. The reason being is the assumption is there's probably going to be a road, or at least an access way. So there's a lot more work for the engineers at the point of construction in terms of site visits and compliance and that sort of stuff. Whereas for a 10 lot subdivision, this is very straightforward. So I suspect the number for the engineer will be significantly lower as well. Operational works fees, that's basically getting your permits to do operational works once you've got the designs done. And then we've got these allocations here for valuations and finance, titles, insurance, accounting and bookkeeping. I love that she's got a fat buffer in there for marketing, especially given that it is a regional market. Because the last thing you want is, if the market slows down, that you have a hesitation in spending money on marketing, because that can be the death of you. If the market starts to pull back, ideally you want to get out before it pulls back even more or slows down even more. So it's not the time to hesitate. It's not the time to penny pinch and go, oh, I didn't allow anything for marketing. This is now a loss of my profits. Well, if you've got the allocation there, you tend to be much faster at going, put the foot to the metal, market the stuff, get rid of it. So that's more the healthier approach rather than chasing the market down. Now, we've put a negative $75,000 amount in there, which is the first time I've ever had that in one of my feasibilities. But this council currently is offering that grant to encourage infill development, which is pretty amazing. So as it stands, this development is eligible for that grant. At this point, we're not talking about a project manager, and there's no finder's fee. So we've got soft costs of $409,000. That's allowing for that grant in there. Always be sure to check on here what is GST applicable and what is not. So that's always an important thing to check. Yep, that all looks fine. Although actually the grant would not be. Okay. Any questions on soft costs before we move on? Rachel, it's a big area. Staging to the rescue. Sounds fair for 10 lots, Gary. Yep. Yeah, now so if you look at this, and this becomes handy doing this sort of a thing. So if you look at this feasibility, you go, okay, we've got civils of 545,000 and we've got 10 lots. Okay, so we're working on roughly 50 to 55,000 in civils per lot, per new lot. Now, the kind of market norm now, when we're talking smaller states or larger states, so where we're actually building roads and those sorts of things, you're pretty much starting at 100,000 per lot. So it gives you an indication as to how much cost goes into road construction, bioretention, water treatment, and all that sort of stuff. Pardon me. So another reason to steer clear of roads early on. Okay, so we've allowed 2.5% plus GST for the sales commissions. Legals on sales, I've upgraded that to 1,000 per lot based on current market activity. And then we've got our sales here. Now, I'm not going to go through this in great detail today. This is an area that I've said to Leandra I'd like to see her put more time and energy into. So these prices are based on an agent that has come out and indicated where they believe they sit in the current market. But there's a fair bit of variability up there. And it is a market that can go hot and cold pretty quickly overnight. So as I've said many times before, sales numbers are your biggest risk in your feasibility. Biggest. Why? Simple mathematical exercise. What's 10% of 3 million? 300,000. So if you're out by 10% on your sales numbers, your profit shifts 300,000. If you're out on your civils by 10%, your profit shifts 50,000. 50,000 versus 300,000. Sales is by far your biggest risk in terms of your numbers. So it tends to be the place that people spend the least amount of time. that's actually where you should spend the most amount of time figuring out what you're going to sell this for. Remember, what are your bankable numbers? And this can be I find when people are using their own money and there's no investors in it, that they tend to be a little bit more relaxed, strangely, and they go, oh, well, it's me, I'm not hurting anyone else if I'm wrong. Dangerous approach. However, when people have investors in play, all of a sudden there's a sense of responsibility. So my way of thinking of it is always think of it as if your grandmother was investing, and I assume you love your grandmother. If your grandmother was investing, bankable numbers, what are the numbers you would tell her or your grandfather, whichever one? What are the numbers you would tell them that you believe are bankable? That's the numbers that should be in your feasibility. You can have another feasibility for what you believe you can achieve, but you're not banking on it. And you should have another feasibility for if the market goes to hell, or the next GFC is coming, what price do you know you can move this stock at really quickly? So these are the numbers we're working on at the moment. Now, from what I've seen, they seem reasonable. When we look at what is sold, oops, that's reset itself now. Hang on. So one of the fastest and easiest ways I like to sort of just stress test these sorts of things is I go to Price Finder, use whatever tool you're using, property shading, and sold date. And the yellow ones are the ones that have sold in the last 12 months. That last 24, 36. I'm most interested in the last 12. So this is sold over the last 12 months, sold for 600,000, middle of last year. This sold for 720,000, end of last year. Both of them are roughly 600 square meter blocks from memory. 520,000. Okay. And I have checked, these properties are all about 20 years old. So 20-year-old properties are selling for, middle of last year and then end of last year, let's call it 700,000. Now they're 20-year-old properties. So a brand new property, now I'm not an expert in the Townsville market, so I'm putting that out there, but obviously a brand new property is always going to be worth more than a 20-year-old property. So the exact same property but brand new is probably worth 100 to 200,000 more in that same location. So if we're working on an $800,000 to $900,000 house and land property, let's call it 850. If you work that backwards, land being bought at 240,000 seems very palatable. Let's say they're putting a $500,000 build on it, which I think for those homes is probably on the upper end. 240,000 block price, $500,000 build, $750,000 house and land package. If end value is 850,000, okay, that makes sense. Now, the exercise I just did there is not enough to go and buy the site on, but that's just me doing a logic check going, yeah, okay, seems like there's value there, but there's a lot more for me to check. That's just the beginning. And for those of you that have been around a while, you remember we've done a couple of masterclass sessions on how to go through that journey to firm up those prices. Highly, highly recommend revisiting that if you haven't seen that for a while, because remember, this is your biggest risk. Any questions there? No, beauty. Okay, so current interest rate she's got is about 6.3%, and she's funding it herself, no investors, so we've got no investor interest cost there. How are we looking? All right, we are looking at $880,000 profit and a 44.9% ROI. And we have a 20% buffer on construction, which in this case is $109,000 buffer on construction. So in theory, if no buffer is used, the profit's $100,000 more. Now, do you ever make the decision based on that? No, you have the buffer there for a reason, because things always take longer and cost more and surprises always happen. But I would say that right now, as it stands, I would say this is a well-padded feasibility, not to the point where I think it's exorbitant. I think this is a healthy feasibility to start with at this point. There is now enough information for Leandri to go and firm up some of these numbers. And as her engineers finalize her designs, she's going to be able to firm up a lot more of these numbers here as well. So what do we take away from this is, does this look like it's worth doing? Absolutely, yes. First run of the feasibility is nearly a $900,000 profit. And most importantly, what we're looking at is that it's a 44.9% ROI. So the relative risk is very low because, and this is where we do the stress testing. Okay, let's have a look down here. All right, so what do we got as an average price? Average is 309. Okay. All right, let's make it 290,000 per block. Oops, not 2.9 million. Okay, so we're out by, actually that's not quite 10%. Let's make it 10%-ish. We are out by 10%. Or maybe we're right, but the market falls 10%. What's the deal look like then? Well, it's still at 31.89% ROI, and it's still a $627,000 profit. Yeah, cool. All right, I'm happy. What else could happen? All right, let's look at the doomsday situation. Market falls 10%, and construction prices. We go through another construction price boom like COVID. Okay, so we've got total civils of 545,000. All right, well, what if we double the buffer to allow for an additional 100,000? All right, we're still at 25% ROI and a $500,000 profit. Okay, this is getting a bit stupid now, but it can happen, so let's just do it. All right, we're out by 20% on the pricing, so we'll drop it down another 30 grand. Oops. All right, so that's where it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, that's not a deal I'd want to do. But what we've had to do to get there, we've had to drop pricing by 20%, and we've had to increase construction costs by 20%. So even at that point, you wouldn't buy the deal if that's what you thought it was going to be. But if that's our worst case doomsdayer situation, great. We're in the black and we're still making $250,000. Now, I want to stress, you wouldn't do the deal if that's what you thought you were going in it for. But if you throw everything at the deal, this is the stress testing part of the feasibility. If you throw everything at it, you try and break it, you look what needs to happen to actually break the feasibility, then if that situation there is still at, okay, we're still in the black, that's good. That's a healthy feasibility. Whereas what a lot of people do is they build their feasibility, but then if you stress test it at all, it breaks. And that's when you know you're sitting on the red line. So just on that point there, did anyone get any aha moments there? What are your thoughts on what I just did there on the stress test? Share any questions, any aha moments about the stress testing there? What did you get out of that? So we actually didn't do that stress testing, Leandri, when you and I got together on this. So how does that make you feel doing that stress test? Make sure you're ready for anything, Rachel. Yeah. The thing is that likely to happen? Hell no. Like, I mean, the chances of that happening are so slim, so slim. But even if they do, you're still in the black. That's, doing those kinds of projects means you can do multiple projects and you can still sleep at night. The projects on the red line, you're not doing multiple projects. Landry, I'm feeling more comfortable. Yeah, good. Now, again, emphasizing that the sales area is what I was suggesting needs the most attention in terms of research, because obviously we're stress testing that number. So that number, which is currently based on very little intel, if that number is in fact inflated, then that stress test is relevant. So that's, it doesn't take away from the need to research that number and get way more comfortable on that number, because the stress testing is only relevant if we're doing it on the real thing. Okay, well, that about wraps it up, guys. So in this case here, this is looking at this point like an absolute cracking deal from Leandri. So well done, Leandri. It's looking certainly promising. You and I have obviously spent a fair bit of time on it over the last couple of days, and you've got your next steps as to what to do and who to talk to, and where areas that need more attention. Yeah, we might, if you're up for it, we might even get you to do a presentation on it at another masterclass in a few months' time to give the guys an update on where you're at. But yeah, last question for some questions, guys. And Evelyn, I'll rewatch it. However, this is great. Excellent. How would it change if you had an investor? Would your profits then add up? Okay, good question. Good question. I like it, Leandri. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so we're going to unwind these things and go back to what we believed to be the actual numbers. These, I can't remember what each of them was, but it was an average of 309. So I'll just do that. Okay, so that brings us back to the 884. Okay, so yes, if you were to use an investor, market rate for an investor is about 12%. All right, now if you want to see what that's costing, you look at this cell here, interest on the loan. So if I delete that for a moment, see nothing. You can see it's allowing for it for 18 months, 12%. Now, something to note, see the allowance is 18 months. The way this feasibility spreadsheet is set up in this particular instance is designed to be conservative, because if you are needing, let's say it's $500,000 to do the project, do you need it all at the start? No, you don't. But this spreadsheet is calculating, assuming you need all of those funds from the very beginning. So in real life, where possible, you'd stage it, because it might be a case that you need to fund, let's call it your consultancy leading up. So you might say, maybe you've got $50,000 or $100,000 worth of consultancy, and that's basically it for 6 to 12 months. Well, you'd raise that money first. And then when you're getting closer to construction, you would raise the additional equity that you needed. So you're not paying interest on that the entire time. But this spreadsheet assumes you've got those funds from the beginning. Okay, 704,000, 30%. So yes, based on these numbers and those sales numbers, it absolutely can support an investor. And like you and I were talking, Leandri, in terms of what your journey is over the next 6, 12, 18 months, that's something potentially that we would look at is, how do we use this deal as the springboard into the next one? Maybe you start with your funds in there, but this is the same model I still use now. Is I start with my funds, I secure the deal, I lock it down, but then I bring investor money in, because then that frees me up again. I'm liquid again. There's a whole lot of emotional, psychological things that happen there too, but then it enables me to be nimble to then pounce on the next opportunity. And same thing, I use my money to secure it, and then I get my money out, investor money in. So that's something potentially that we look at over the next 6, 12, 18 months, is how we take those next steps, and when we're looking at the next 5 or 10 years for you. Okay. Rachel, I want a cracking deal. And you can have one. Well done, Leandri. Yep. Excellent. Okay. Final questions, guys, because I actually need to run out to two of my sites this afternoon. So last chance for questions. Thank you, Peter. Did not think of it like that. Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's many steps in the way that, your next 5 years done, I'm not going to say the right way, because there's so many ways to do it, but your next 5 years can look very, very, very different depending on the way you take the steps and the way you arrange things. And yeah, some very small tweaks can make a very big difference to that result in 5 years, let alone 10 years. So yeah, good. I'm glad that's giving you something to think on. Excellent. Okay. Great, guys. Actually, any feedback from the platform while I've still got you on here? So obviously most of you, I think all of you are watching on YouTube, which is good. Any feedback on the use of this platform? Any challenges you had with it? Any things that were better doing it this way rather than Zoom, or any things that were worse doing it this way rather than Zoom? Awesome. Good. No worries, Gary. Thanks. Good on you for joining. All right, guys, that's me signing off. Thanks again, and I will see you next week, if not before. Thanks, guys. Bye.